The Monsters That Made Us is brought to you by the Cage Club Podcast Network. For all things movies, music, media, monsters, and more, head on over to cageclub.me. That's cageclub.me. Today we're going all the way back to around 3000 BC, long before the pyramids, when a horde of warriors from the east, led by the seemingly invincible King Memnon, has conquered all but a few of the local tribes with the aid of a powerful sorceress who can predict the outcome of the battles before they occur. When Akkadian warrior Matthias is tasked with assassinating this sorceress to give the remaining tribes a fighting chance against Memnon's army, he is ultimately betrayed, his brother is killed, and he is left for dead in the unforgiving desert sun. Now, on a mission of vengeance, Matthias must rely on both his wits and his strength, as well as the aid of a horse thief, a magician, and the sorceress herself, to unite the rebels, defeat Memnon, and bring a new era of peace to the people. Prepare to witness the birth of a legend as we discuss the Scorpion King.
To a new world of gods and monsters.
Listen to them, children of the night.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? I'll show you who I am and what I am!
You're insane. I tell you, I killed a wolf, a plain, ordinary wolf.
By studying these and other species, we add to our knowledge of how life evolved, how it adapted itself to this world.
He went for a little walk. He could have seen his face.
Welcome to the return of The Monsters That Made Us, the podcast where we celebrate the spooktacular characters and films in the Universal Studios Classic Monster series. Today we'll be discussing the 2002 Mummy spin-off, The Scorpion King. I'm the Invisible Dan Colon, and joining me as always is my co-host and sorcerer, Monster Mike Manzi. How are you, Mike?
Dan, I just want you to know, I make my own destiny.
As we know, the original Universal monster movies had established a shared universe with multiple sequels that brought together Dracula, the Frankenstein monster, and the Wolfman. But until now, we've never encountered a spin-off. It wasn't really something that studios did back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. But now, if you have a hit movie and there's a popular side character, next thing to do is give them their own movie, right? So now with the mega success of both The Mummy and The Mummy Returns, and with The Rock, one of the hottest names in professional wrestling at the time, also looking to establish himself as a movie star, Universal saw fit to give their latest monster a movie of its own. But this is not the origin of a monster. It's the origin of a hero. A Conan the Barbarian style sword and sandal adventure film about a last of his kind warrior on a quest for revenge long before he morphs into the ruthless conqueror we know from the opening minutes of The Mummy Returns. Now, this is admittedly a strange sort of movie for us to be covering on The Monsters That Made Us. It's not a horror movie, there are no monsters, but it is connected to The Mummy and that universe. So we felt we should explore this character for better or worse. So hopefully, if you're listening to this, you're excited to join us for this ride, because if the sequels are anything like this first one, I think it will be a lot of fun. So far, we haven't gotten any hate mail since our announcement in our previous episode. So I'm optimistic that this will be a good time for everybody. And you know what? The way our schedule works out, because we're doing everything chronologically, if you're not into the Scorpion King and the subsequent movies, you're going to get a Scorpion King like every other episode, right? So like in between, you'll get Wolfman and you'll get Dracula and other things. So it's okay. You can skip these if you don't like them, but I think it's gonna be fun to talk about these. So Mike, I have to ask, what's your history with this first Scorpion King movie?
Very little. I had never seen it before, at least not in its entirety. I remember seeing one or two sequences, definitely the fire ants, which we'll talk about later on, a standout moment in the film. But, I think it wasn't on my radar. I think after The Mummy, I wanted maybe more monsters. I wasn't that interested in going back and figuring out where that scorpion monster came from. It just didn't kind of appeal to me. I was kind of phasing out of my wrestling watching at this point. point, as soon as like the Attitude Era was starting to come into full swing is kind of when I was leaving wrestling. I'm still a huge fan, and I still was, and I followed The Rock a lot. So like, I don't know why I wasn't kind of more into this one. Admittedly, nowadays, like I'm way more into the sort of D&D campaigns and the Sword and Sandal stuff and the Conan ripoffs and like Cole the Conqueror and like all that stuff. Like it appeals to me way more now. So like I had a blast watching this. I will say it's got problems, okay, but it also doesn't have problems. Like I really enjoy a lot of stuff in it. I think for The Rock's first role, it's a good role for him because it's kind of like Arnold. Like he doesn't really have to talk that much. He can like wrestle his way through the movie. He looks good doing the action. He can be funny when he has to be, and he's got like that appeal, right? He's got sex appeal, and this movie is super sexy. Like I was not expecting that at all. We'll definitely talk about Kelly Hu later, but I did have some disappointments. Like you mentioned, there really are no monsters. We don't even get half a scorpion monster. We barely get any scorpion talk. The stuff that's in it scorpion wise is pretty cryptic.
Yeah, for like a prequel origin story for this monster we just saw, it is almost entirely disconnected from The Mummy and The Mummy Returns, right?
Shocking. He doesn't really start off like a great guy, so you can kind of see how he becomes maybe like a power hungry titan of some type, that like rules the desert one day. But the movie does a full on anti-hero thing with him by the end. And he's just like, I think of him almost like Wolverine now, where it's like he's got a bad attitude, but he's going to like protect the kid and, save the girl or whatever, like take care of the team. He's got his little X-Force with him and stuff. So we'll get into it more, but first impressions were like pretty good, to be honest with you. I was pretty surprised. It's fun.
I don't remember having ever watched this before I watched for the show. It was never really something that I actively was interested in. I certainly didn't see it in the theater back in 2002. I was into wrestling as well. I was kind of getting at it around that time, but I wasn't watching WWF. I was watching WCW. I was watching Monday Nitro. I knew who The Rock was because a lot of kids I went to school with were fans of WWF, and it was in my periphery, but The Rock wasn't this superstar to me. But I certainly knew who he was. Knowing what I know about The Rock now, he's one of the biggest superstars in the world. I agree with you that this is a sort of perfect debut starring role for him. It sort of is tailored to a lot of his strengths in the ring as a wrestler, because The Rock as a character is very charming and charismatic. He's great on the microphone. And of course, he's a pro wrestler, so he's very physical. And so this movie plays to his strengths in just about every way, which is what you want. You want to set up your star on the right note. And so as many problems as this movie has, I don't think that's one of them. I think that's actually one of the strengths of this thing. I'm also a fan of Conan the Barbarian comics. And so those are not high art, right? Those are not great literature, but I love this sort of pulpy nonsense of a Conan comic. This is like a really great representation of that genre. And I think that while it might not be for everybody, this does kind of work on all those levels. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised as well. I had a really good time. I mean, I didn't love it, but I think I give it a lot more credit than it's probably due because I'm just a fan of the genre.
Yeah, I hear you. And like we're doing this whole series, so I'm definitely giving it more attention than I would have if I had like come across it on a streaming service and it's just like, oh, let me check it out. Like I'm watching it with the eyes of the show and stuff. So I'm a little more paying attention to it than I might ordinarily. And I will say this, and like this movie has me actually kind of interested in seeing where this is going to go and all those direct to video sequels we're going to watch. So like I'm getting a little more excited about going through that. But my biggest thing about this, then I'm sure you're going to tell me why, is I don't know why Steven Summers wouldn't do this. This didn't seem like that big a production. Like that's the big thing for me that bothers me is like it almost felt like, oh, an afterthought, like we have to make this movie. It's part of the contract, but like we're just gonna kind of do it quick and get it out of the way, and then go on to like bigger things like Van Helsing and Wolfman and other kind of stuff like that. It almost had that sense of like the studio was like, oh darn it, we still got to make that movie. Like, okay, just get someone to do it. I don't know the behind the scenes to this yet, but it just watching it felt like these guys were in detention or something, or like they were just like on the bad side of the lot, or like, they just gave them the least amount of stuff to get their film made, and I'm just surprised considering we have The Rock, we're trying to showcase him. We have a lot of other pretty big stars at the time, like Michael Clark Duncan is here, RIP, like that's awesome to see. but it's coming from The Mummy and The Mummy Returns and that whole series, and there's such this big buildup, and we're going to expand, and like that all felt like Lord of the Rings, and like this feels like reading The Hobbit. It feels like
Yeah.
such a big pullback from where it felt they were going.
I hate to disappoint you, but I don't specifically know why Stephen Sommers didn't come back to direct. Like, he did write the screenplay, and we'll talk about that. I can only suspect that he had kind of done everything he had wanted to do with The Mummy Returns and then was ready to move on to the next thing. Of course, his next movie, and it's going to be our next episode, is Van Helsing. So I have to imagine that once he got done with The Mummy Returns, he went right into pre-production on Van Helsing, which is why he only wrote the screenplay for this.
At least he wrote the screenplay. It's nice to know he was that involved. Comparatively, Van Helsing is ginormous compared to this. So I could see now needing full focus and attention on that project, aside from here.
Yeah, and this is also like a launching point for a new star for The Rock. And so they only had a budget of like $60 million. I think what you were saying is kind of right, that they wanted Stephen Sommers for the bigger, more important project. Van Helsing was a bigger tentpole film than The Scorpion King was. In a lot of ways, Universal was bracing for the Scorpion King to not be successful. And so they had Stephen Sommers write the screenplay just to have his name on it. But I think they wanted him working on Van Helsing instead.
That makes sense, and you can kind of feel like there's very little digital effects in this. You get we'll have like those snakes later, but like I was expecting there to be, guys with scorpion hands or something, right? Like claw art, like the guy at the end, I thought he was going to start changing, but it's very practical, which is fun. Once you realize like, okay, we're not going to really get any of that, you kind of forget about it. At times it feels like maybe one step up from like watching Xena, but it is still a step up from that, and it's still a lot of fun. And so when we get to Van Helsing though, man, that is a CGI extravaganza.
For sure. That's a good segue. Let's get into the production. So this was produced by Sean Daniel, James Jacks, and Stephen Sommers. So they all came back to produce. It was also produced by Kevin Misher. Now, Misher is a sort of newcomer to the team. He had worked his way up from financial analyst for HBO CEO Michael Fuchs to creative executive at TriStar, where he oversaw production of Donnie Brasco and Rudy and other films before becoming the president of production at Universal in 1996 when he was only 33 years old. He had such a knack for selecting what would end up being successful projects that he worked his way up pretty quickly. He ended up supervising the production of Out of Sight, Aaron Brockovich, Meet the Parents, Fast and the Furious, The Bourne Identity, and of course, The Mummy.
Nice. That's a pretty big hit list.
He left Universal in 2001 to start his own production company, Misher Films, where his first project was The Scorpion King. In the director's chair, we've got Chuck Russell. Now, I was unfamiliar with Chuck Russell by name, but when I checked out his filmography, I was surprised to learn that I'm actually very familiar with his work. In fact, you and I have discussed him before on your other show, Third Time's a Charm. His directorial debut was 1987's A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors.
My favorite Nightmare on Elm Street. Excellent. The Dream Warriors. Oh my gosh. Wow, I know a lot of his films.
He's no stranger to genre filmmaking. He also directed the 1988 remake of The Blob and 1994's The Mask, where his work with Industrial Light and Magic earned the film an Academy Award nomination for Best Visual Effects, losing to Forrest Gump.
The Blob is amazing, like great practical effects. Same with Elm Street. And The Mask with those digital effects, the kind of like groundbreaking digital effects. Like he worked with Arnold. He did Eraser with Arnold. He's got like all the corners needed to kind of create a Scorpion King.
According to him on the Blu-ray commentary, he really wanted to be a part of this project as soon as he learned that The Rock was attached to Star. That was the draw for him. The screenplay, like I said, was written by Stephen Sommers based on a story by Jonathan Hales, who also contributed to multiple episodes of The Adventures of Young Indiana Jones, and he co-authored Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones.
Hey, all right. Pretty cool. I like some of those old indie episodes, especially when he's a little kid and he's running into like Tolstoy. It's so weird. Like Teddy Roosevelt teaches him how to shoot a gun while he's on safari with his parents. It's nuts.
There's no real juicy behind the scenes stuff that I could find, but I do have a couple of production notes. The story was possibly inspired by the 1995 discovery of a 5,400-year-old limestone carving known as the Scorpion Tableau, which depicts the victory of Scorpion II, aka King Scorpion, in a battle that unified Upper Egypt, which ultimately led to the complete unification of Egypt under Narmer, the first pharaoh. In fact, some believe that Narmer himself might have been King Scorpion.
So, okay, I mean, it makes total sense to call it like that, even way back then, thousands of years ago, to call yourself Scorpion King, but it just never occurred to me that there would have been a real one. But like, as far as symbolism and all that kind of, a scorpion is the perfect thing. That's awesome.
To me, that smells like Stephen Sommers, because as broad as these adventure movies are, he does tend to, base a lot of things on reality. Like I remember we talked about in The Mummy, like the Egyptian language that is spoken. Nobody knows what Egyptian sounded like, but they had linguists go in and kind of estimate what it might have sounded like. I love that he sort of took this nugget of truth and then spun this whole Scorpion King adventure film out of it.
Yeah, that's all you need is like a little grain of an idea, and it's like, oh yeah, let's take it in this direction.
Unlike The Mummy and The Mummy Returns, The Scorpion King was shot almost entirely in Southern California, utilizing both Universal's sound stages as well as the Anza Borrego Desert State Park. The Gomorrah Bazaar actually was shot on what is known as Spartacus Square, named, of course, for its use in Spartacus.
Awesome.
So that's why like a lot of it feels so practical. I mean, they were shooting everything in SoCal and, in the old Spartacus set, which I think is pretty awesome. On the commentary, Chuck Russell mentions that like at a certain point, like after the release of this movie, if you took the Universal Studios tour in California, they'd go through that set and the tour guide would reference that it was used in The Scorpion King and Spartacus, kind of giving it top billing over Spartacus.
Here's a more recent movie you might have remembered it from. Have they not used it since Spartacus?
When it comes to the visual effects, the opening credit sequence and all the character enhancement, which would include like the fire ants, snakes, and other living things, were done by a company called Centropolis Effects. And all the landscape enhancement, including Memnon's Palace, was handled by Riot Pictures. If there appeared to be a lot of red in the overall production design of this movie, that's because Chuck Russell had the designers utilize a lot of red in order to mitigate some of the violence and keep the action somewhat kid-friendly. His thinking was that with so much red on the screen, you wouldn't miss the blood.
Now, Dan, if I may just interject real quick, we're talking production. If I'm not mistaken, at one point, Haywood Hollywood Horses were supposed to be in charge of some of the animals here, including Jean Jacket's very first movie. However, they decided to go with camels instead. So
yes, I love that connection too. Nope.
To the film, nope.
In case you were wondering about the electric guitar in the film's score,
thank you. I'm glad you brought that up because at moments, the movie sounds like an Alan Silvestri movie, and at other times, it sounds like a Metallica concert.
Yeah, well, that's because Chuck Russell wanted the music to match The Rock's general vibe. He asked composer John Debney to incorporate some rock and roll with the more traditional orchestration.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And have you looked at the soundtrack to this movie?
No, actually, I had not had the time.
It was certified gold, so it sold fairly well. But we've got artists like POD, Creed, Drowning Pool, System of a Down, Godsmack.
That was the
Nickelback.
time.
It's one of those soundtracks. That's about it for production notes. We can get right into the cast. We already sort of talked about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Here he plays Matthias, aka the Scorpion King.
Yeah, I'm not calling him Matthias. I barely picked that up throughout the movie. I was just like, Scorpion King.
This was like his first film as a leading man. And we sort of talked about in the Mummy Returns episode that he ranks among the highest paid actors in the world. But with this movie, he set a Guinness World Record for the Scorpion King for the highest salary for a first-time leading man. He made $5.5 million for this one.
Wow. Did that turn out to be his quote? Or his quote or anything? I was like, if I made that much money, I'd retire immediately. I'd be like, I'm good.
Yeah, that was the most any first-time leading man had ever made up to that point.
Cool. Good for him. I wonder if WWE was part of that deal. Like, no, listen, like Vince got in there. He's like, we're going to get my guy millions. All right.
So Vince is listed among the executive producers. That's one of those situations where he really didn't contribute anything, but because they refer to Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as The Rock in the credits,
Yes.
WWE owns The Rock, so he was given an executive producer credit. So that's the reason for that, because I was curious to know how much Vince McMahon actually had influence over this one, but it's really just that. It's just so they could call him The Rock.
Yeah, he owned the name.
The Rock performed many of his own stunts himself, and he learned to use that big-ass sword in only 4 weeks' time.
Not bad. How about the archery? Was that really him too?
By comparison, Arnold Schwarzenegger had about a year to prepare for Conan the Barbarian.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of sword play in this movie too, and flaming sword play.
Lot of swordplay. Stephen Brand plays Memnon. This is also Stephen Brand's feature film debut.
Oh.
Prior to this, he spent almost a decade on British television. While The Rock was learning how to act for this one, Stephen Brand was kind of learning how to be an action star. He had since worked steadily on films and in TV, including Hellraiser Revelations, and most recently Saw X, as well as the Teen Wolf series, where he was nominated for Best Guest Starring Role on Television at the Saturn Awards.
I've only seen Mayhem, but I didn't recognize him from anything. So like, it was kind of cool. I was like, oh, who's this guy?
Yeah, he looks familiar, but I haven't seen him. And I looked through his credits, and none of it rings a bell to me. I've seen Hellraiser Revelations, but like
He's
once.
also in Hellraiser Judgment. Is he the new Pinhead by any chance? Like, what is that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Fun fact about the role of Memnon. So the role was originally written for Chow Yun-fat.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but his manager vetoed that, claiming that playing a
Oh.
villain would be a betrayal to his fans.
Oh, come on. I guess, but I'm a fan of his. That would have been fun to see him do that as a turn. I guess they'll go back to the well eventually and get Jet Li
They will. Yep.
to appear in one of these.
In fact, it would make more sense to have an actor of Asian descent to play like this, warlord
Mhm.
from the East. I think that was the whole idea. But when he turned it down, they decided to cast Stephen Brand. So Kelly Hu plays the sorceress. I've also seen her credited as Cassandra. So I don't believe her name is ever mentioned in the film. But, for the sake of this, we'll just refer to her as the sorceress. I didn't know much about her. She's a former fashion model and Miss Teen USA 1985.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and she began her acting career in the late 80s, appearing on Growing Pains, Night Court, and 21 Jump Street. But
Mhm.
she made her feature film debut in 1989 in Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan.
I couldn't believe it. I'm going to have to go watch it real soon to find her in it, but that is incredible. Like so many stars come from horror. Like that series too. Like there's a bunch of people from like Kevin Bacon and Corey Feldman. Like she's among the pantheon of Friday the 13th alum. I had only ever seen her in X2, and she was badass in that. So
Yeah.
I was like ready for her to kick some more ass in this movie, and she kind of does. Should be wearing a little more clothes. Like I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining, but I'm just saying like give her like a couple more pieces of fabric.
Yeah, I watched this like 3 times in preparation for this. And every
Mhm.
single time I watched it, I just kept thinking like what a trooper she was on set, because she spends almost this entire movie in various stages of undress. I think in 2 full sequences, she's absolutely totally nude.
Yeah. Strategically nude with like
Yes.
the hair placement, like they do that whole thing. And like it's kind of a trope, like the sorceress is usually more depicted as like erotic, I guess, like because of magic and sex magic. And I'm not making this up. Like this is, in comics, and there's other women in the movie, and they're
Right.
like barbarians or mothers or, like it runs the gambit. So it's not just like she's the only female in the film, right? I think it has a little more to do with kind of like the historical tropes of the type of character of the sultry sorceress that she's supposed to be playing.
This is total like Frank Frazetta type stuff, which in that vein, I get it. It makes sense. It's a logical choice for the genre, but it really just gave me pause because this is a PG-13 movie that a lot of kids went to see. And there's even a joke at one point in the movie where the kid like throws a coin into a wishing well and like she pops out totally naked.
Yeah, it's a horny movie for sure. No, that's part of the humor. It's kind of funny how little regard for appropriateness there is in this, and like regarding the censors, that is sort of strange to me that this doesn't have like more restrictions on nudity and things like that. Like she's not completely nude, but that they wouldn't ask them to have her covered up more, because that is like their main gripe with stuff. Like the violence, I understand. It's like the sex and things like that like the censors and the MPAA usually have a problem with. For that stuff to kind of sneak through, and for there to be like people getting beheaded and arms chopped off, bow and arrowed out of windows and shit, and like it's wild the type of violence that it opens with like someone getting stabbed in the face or something. It's a really shocking opening moment in this movie. Yeah, it is kind of crazy. It's like slipped through the cracks.
Yeah, after The Scorpion King, she appeared in Cradle to the Grave, and like you mentioned, X2, she played Lady Deathstrike in that. She's still working today, doing a lot of films and TV shows. She's been on The Vampire Diaries, Arrow. She's did a voice on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's pretty cool. Grant Heslov plays Arpide, the horse thief.
Grant Heslov, best friend to notorious Hollywood prankster George Clooney.
Yes.
They're like Ben and Matt. It's really cool to read up on.
I didn't know that until I started researching this episode. He's credited as Arpid. I don't remember his name ever being mentioned. Like, this movie has all these characters with names that I never hear.
And it's not just even that. Like, you're gonna have to hold my hand through the desert at some points because, like, it just goes left and right and wherever it wants to go at times. I'm not surprised that we don't learn names at all because half the time I don't know where we're going.
Fair enough. So Heslov is a pretty wonderful character actor from film and television. He began in the early 80s, but he really hit his stride in the mid 90s, where he appeared in True Lies, Congo, Black Sheep, The Birdcage, Dante's Peak, and Enemy of the State, all consecutively. And then after The Scorpion King, he officially got into writing and producing when he formed Smokehouse Pictures with George Clooney. And as a result, he's collaborated with Clooney on a number of projects, including Good Night and Good Luck, for which he received an Academy Award nomination. And he won the Academy Award for Best Picture for Argo.
This guy was all over the 90s. Like, it's like every week you go to the movie and he'd pop up somewhere. He's in Congo, he's in True Lies. Like, he's just all over the place, and it's really fun to see.
He is most recognizable to me from his role in The Birdcage. I fucking love that movie. Bernard Hill plays Philos, Memnon's like magician. Bernard Hill is a prolific English character actor. Many will know him from his work as Captain Smith in Titanic, and of course Theoden, the King of Rohan in the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Look at that. He was double dipping. Because we mentioned Lord of the Rings so much last time, as far as like them trying to like expand this stuff. And like, here he is. They're like, we'll even get some Lord of the Rings guys to be in this.
Well, this was like right around that time.
Two Towers was the same year, right? They had a lot of this filmed before those movies came out, right? I heard they were like filming those movies for years and then they came out. I could be wrong as well.
I imagine he was cast more on his strength from like other stuff. Probably, I'm sure Titanic had some influence over that. By some coincidence, he ended up doing The Scorpion King and Lord of the Rings all in the same year.
It could have been his agent where he was like, hey, you were just doing some magic stuff. You want to be like a magic dude in this movie?
Because he had done Titanic and The Lord of the Rings, he is the only actor to have appeared in more than one film that won 11 Academy Awards. So,
oh, wow.
It's a nice feather in his cap.
That's a crazy statistic.
Isn't it? It sort of reminds me of John Cazale. You know, he did like 5 movies and they were all Best Picture nominees. So yeah, that's also pretty cool. Next is Michael Clarke Duncan. We've sort of talked about him already. He plays Balthazar in this. Like The Rock, Michael Clarke Duncan originally had aspirations of being a professional athlete, even trying out for his hometown Chicago Bears. But instead, he chose to pursue acting after his mom refused to let him play football for fear that he would get injured. After moving to LA, as he was seeking acting and modeling work, he found that his 6'5", 315-pound frame could help him earn money as a bodyguard. And so while he was trying to get cast in movies and TV shows, he worked for Will Smith, Martin Lawrence, Jamie Foxx, LL Cool J, and the Notorious B.I.G.
Wow.
And then ultimately left the personal protection business after Biggie was killed in 1997.
Oh, wow. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know he was a bodyguard for those dudes.
I expected when we came into this season, like we're going to be talking about a lot of actors that are still fresh in our minds or are still very active today, and that I wouldn't be spending so much time like talking about who they are. But I keep finding really cool stuff about a lot of these actors. So yeah, we're still just doing the same thing we were doing with the actors from the 30s and 40s.
I remember first seeing him, I think, in Armageddon, and I was just like, who is this guy? He's hilarious, and he's humongous. And then Kingpin and Daredevil and Green Mile and all that. He was always like a great presence on screen, you know? That's a big miss. I miss him a lot. Big loss.
He got that Armageddon role after 2 performances. They were like small roles. He played a bouncer in both movies. He was in Bulworth and A Night at the Roxbury. He was credited as Big Mike Duncan. And then, of course, that led to Armageddon. And then Armageddon led to The Green Mile, which earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. That's basically his career-defining performance, I would say.
Such an amazing voice. I could just listen to him like read anything, read the phone book or something.
Yeah, I really miss him. I'm sure most of our listeners know that, yeah, he passed away of a heart attack in 2012. Doesn't feel that long. So Peter Fancinelli plays Takmet, who, again, another character whose name I don't think we ever hear. He is the dude who betrays Matthias. He kills his father and then betrays Matthias and his brother and all that. So that's who that is, Peter Fancinelli.
He's from some stuff on the network they cover quite often, the Twilight series of films. He plays Dr. Daddy.
Yes, he is Dr. Carlisle Cullen in Twilight. He also played Mike Dexter in the 1999 film Can't Hardly Wait.
I have a feeling like Hugh Jackman auditioned for this, because they're like, damn it, we lost Hugh to X-Men. Like, get us a Hugh Jackman lookalike. I'm sure you're going to mention Roger Rees next, the guy who plays his king father, King Ferron. But, like, he looks like King Conan. Like, He
Yes.
looks like old Conan is depicted, with the scraggly beard and the heavy crown and the giant sword.
Ralph Muller plays Thorak. Thorak, I know, he's the soldier who is sent out to go find the sorceress and Matthias out in the desert when they have that big fight scene in the dust storm. I mention him because his history is somewhat interesting. He was a former competitive bodybuilder and at 6 foot 6 inches, 288 pounds, one of the tallest bodybuilding champions of all time. He made his debut in 1989 Cyborg and appeared in Universal Soldier in 1992. But I recognized him from Gladiator.
Yeah. Weird thing, it seems that he played Conan the Barbarian in the legendary Conan the Adventurer series from 1997 to 1998.
There it is. Branscombe Richmond plays Jessup, Matthias's brother, who is a small role. I think he's in the opening sequence and then dies, like 20 minutes into the movie. He's a prolific Hawaiian actor who began his career in 1976, continues to work in film and television. His most well-known role is probably Bobby Sixkiller in the 1990s TV series Renegade. This is really just for me. He did play Klingon Gunner number 2 in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, which we also talked about on Third Time's a Charm.
All right.
Roger Rees, you mentioned, plays King Ferron. Didn't have anything super interesting about him, but Sherry Howard plays Queen Isis. She wears many hats. She has done some acting. She continues to do some acting, but she's mostly known for being an Olympic runner, specializing in the 400-meter relay, in which she won gold in 1984 and silver in 1988. There's all these separate tribes, right? She is the leader of the one tribe. She's the black woman with the awesome hair.
Yeah, she's like the woman king.
Yeah. So The Scorpion King opened at number 1 at the box office, succeeding The Matrix for the largest April opening weekend at the time.
Whoa, that's wild. Well, I mean, who knew? No one knew The Matrix yet.
Right, that had legs that The Scorpion King did not have. But The Scorpion King didn't do too bad. It earned a total worldwide gross of more than $178 million compared to its $60 million budget. So it was a modest success by today's standards. And so far, The Scorpion King has spawned 1 prequel and 3 sequels, all of which we will get to.
Wait a second. Hold on a minute. There's a prequel? One of these, it's going to be a prequel?
Yeah, so The Scorpion King 2 is a prequel to this.
Okay. I'm sorry. It's just trying to process that in real time. I'll just put that in the back of my mind for now. Okay, we'll get there.
It also spawned 2 video games. And as of this recording, per The Hollywood Reporter, Universal is currently developing a modern-day Scorpion King reboot from Academy Award-winning screenwriter Jonathan Herman, which will be produced by Dwayne Johnson and Danny and Hiram Garcia.
Are you telling me Universal's like, you know what? Scorpion King, we created it. It's on the table. We're bringing that back with the Mummy and the Invisible Man and Dracula and everybody. Like, that is wild.
So that report, I believe, came out in the late teens.
That's still not that long ago for it to not be in some sort of production loop of some kind.
The original announcement was made in November of 2020.
There we go.
It is, yeah, I mean, as far as I know, this thing's going forward.
It would be so wild if The Rock came back to play the Scorpion King and he was just like a modern day businessman and he unlocks the power of the Scorpion King. How is this going to work in modern day? I
don't know. And we don't know that The Rock will be starring in it. We know he is definitely producing it. We'll have to keep an eye out for that.
It's just so funny how they're like, he counts. He counts.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same sort of logic we used, right? He counts.
He counts enough.
That's all I got for the behind-the-scenes stuff. We can get into the movie. One of the great things about this movie is that it doesn't really overcomplicate too much. The story is pretty simplistic.
And even still, I got a little lost. I will say before we get started, I love how it's 90 minutes, but I heard a rumor that this movie was only 70 minutes for the first cut, and they had to run back out and shoot a bunch more stuff.
Yeah, I think the original runtime was around 70 to 75 minutes, something like that.
And I don't know, maybe the desert sequence in the cave might have been an insert extra shoot or something, but otherwise, I don't really feel that. I actually like the brisk pace, and I felt that it moved along pretty quickly.
It does keep moving, right? This thing doesn't really slow down too much. We're just coming off The Mummy Returns. We sort of talked about how that was an exercise in like excessive action, nonstop, full throttle action. This finds a way to like keep things moving pretty quickly, but without feeling exhausting. And I think part of that has to do with the runtime by keeping it 90 minutes. I know Chuck Russell really wanted to emphasize Matthias's wit over his brute strength. That allows for like sort of a balance of, you know, how Matthias deals with his problems. I think it's a really solid blend of action and humor. So really enjoy this. So it opens with this horde who are celebrating victory. They're in what looks like a big, what would you call that?
It's like a giant hut almost, or
Yeah,
something.
like
Like,
a-
it almost looks like somewhere Beowulf would hang out.
Like a big teepee kind of structure.
But they're in the snow, so they almost feel like Vikings.
Yes, he's listing off like all these different people that they've conquered. In the same breath, he rattles off like the Babylonians and the Mesopotamians, who are the same people. Like he's really excited for the opportunity to finally kill an Akkadian, and we see who we will discover is Matthias's brother Jessup, sort of strapped to this cross. So the movie begins with the rescue of Jessup. Matthias like drops in from the ceiling. There's a whole fight sequence. Of course, he saves his brother.
Yeah, apparently these guys are endangered as well. There's only like 3 to 5 of these dudes left in the entire tribe. Like, that's their entire crew. So they're also gloating about that. Like, we captured one of like the fiercest warriors on the planet and everything. And then in bursts The Rock, who's like, is it his older brother? Does he make a joke? Or he's like, I'm always saving your dumb brother.
The scene ends with him saying, you know, you're lucky you're my brother.
That's it.
I love that The Rock's first line in a starring role is boo.
Yeah, right.
He like walks in and there's fire behind him and he just looks up and goes boo.
The whole place like erupts in panic when he does that, and like people go running all over the place. They start attacking him. I mean, he's walking in there to like start a fight. He's not being subtle at all. But I thought that was interesting, you know. I mean, there's some context there. The Rock is like the last of his kind. That's sort of familiar territory. That reminds me of like Vin Diesel's character in Near Dark, the last of his kind.
Oh, yep.
He, like crews up with a bunch of people. I like that.
After Matthias saves his brother, we get like the opening credits. We get the narrator. We don't have Ardith Bay this time. We have a like a disembodied voice. I don't think it's a character in the movie.
I thought it might be the magician, like the wizard dude later.
The basic setup is that there's been this like horde coming in from the east led by Memnon, and essentially their leader is decided by like the fiercest warrior, right? And Memnon has been able to defeat all of his enemies, and the reason he's able to do that is because he has this sorceress as a captive. We will learn later on in the movie that she's essentially been his captive since childhood, and she has the ability to see into the future and know the outcome of his battle. So he's really just going to take on groups that he knows he can defeat.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's because I'm watching the movie and I'm like, oh, right. Like, he's not a great warrior at all. He's cheating.
Yeah.
He has the sorceress tell him everything. There's also kind of like, I'm getting at the start of this like a big He-Man vibe, you know?
Sure.
I'm getting those sort of battle lines being drawn in the sand where we have The Rock as He-Man and this guy's like whoever Skeletor was, Eldor or whatever. I think he was someone before he got his face melted off. And this is like the sorceress and everything. And I could get down. That's all. What I'm saying is like, I like this kind of stuff. Like, it's goofy and it's very broad, but it got me. Like, I'm digging it.
He is a legitimately great swordsman. Like, that's sort of his thing, you know, so he can do that.
He's no pushover. Like, he still has the balls to like run out on the battlefield and like kick ass and stuff, you know, but he's still got like the edge.
Yeah. So that inspires his men, you know, his army grows bigger with each city they conquer. We're now down to like the last few tribes left. They are kind of known as like the rebels of the region to Memnon. We have several different tribes. One's led by Balthasar, one's led by Queen Isis. Of course, we've got our 3 3 remaining Akkadians. And they all, I think, fall under the jurisdiction of King Pharaon.
Yeah.
These tribes don't want to take on Memnon because they're afraid they're going to lose, but they know that he's got this sorcerer. And so the Pharaon hires the Akkadians to go assassinate the sorceress, that they will at least have, I guess, a fighting chance against Memnon and his forces.
That's the best plan. You take her out, then he can't foretell the future, and he don't know how like the battle's going to end, if he's going to win or not, you know? So that's it. Like he loses his trump card. That's actually a really good plan, and it definitely should have worked. And I like King Pharaon. He looks like Lord of the Rings or old King Conan here and out in the desert. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, and I'm not expecting what's going to happen to the extent that it happens. I was like, all right, cool. Like they'll kill the sorcerer. They're probably going to like run into somebody after that, you know, while they're escaping, and then they're going to be on the run. Like, I'm good with this setup.
That night, Matthias and the other 2 Akkadians infiltrate the camp, the nearby camp of Memnon's forces. This is where we are introduced to the horse thief hanging upside down over a fire. Like, it's very silly and cartoony, but it kind of works.
That's Grant Heslov, right? That's what they call him, the whole movie, horse thief, not Arpid.
This is like the beginning of like a whole action sequence. I love that Matthias has this camel. First of all, I want to address the camel. I don't think the camel has a name, but it's like all these great pulp heroes that we know. They all kind of have their animal companion. Like Zorro had Tornado, and the Phantom had several. He had a horse and a wolf. And so I love that Matthias has his camel. There's a great relationship with camels. So he zip lines into Memnon's camp, which is really fun. There's a whole fight sequence which results in his brother being captured. And as Matthias is sneaking in to save his brother again, he is distracted by the sorceress. He encounters her. I don't think he realizes up until this point that this sorcerer is a sorceress, right? He's sort of captivated by her beauty.
Yes, gorgeous sorceress.
And that distraction is enough for him to sort of get restrained. Memnon basically kills his brother in front of him, but she saves Matthias's life. For some reason we don't know. She lies, right? I think that's pretty cool.
This sequence is nuts. Like a lot kind of happens. Like he bursts in and sees her, and she's like getting dressed or something, and it's like shockingly beautiful. It's like a record scratch. It's like, "Rrr." And then they come in with his brother. Don't they like murk him right in front of him or something? And then he's like, "You're the last of your kind now. You're like an endangered species, boy."
Yes.
And then she's like, "I'm sorry if you were double crossed." And Takmet comes in with the head of his father.
Yes.
Right? And he's like, "Oh, I've got my dad's head here." He's like, "Look, we've double crossed everybody. Like, I'm down with Memnon. That's what's up." There's a lot going on in this little tent here tonight, which is kind of crazy.
I didn't realize just how much occurs until I wrote it all down.
Sometimes I feel like the sorceress is lying to save her own ass, right? And it's she probably had the vision of the Rock saving her at one point and was like, okay, I got to do what I can to kind of line up these cards right and make sure everything falls into place. And so when he shows up, like, I got to have this story where, like, I'll tell the dude I had this vision and he'll believe me because every other time it's worked out, but this time it'll kind of be bullshit, you know? And so, like, she's saving the Rock to rescue her later.
The story she tells is that Memnon can't kill Matthias with his own hands or any hand that he commands, or else he himself will be defeated in battle or some shit.
And we know that the Scorpion King dies by the hands of Rick in the future with the Spear Destiny, you know, in the Oasis of Magic. So, like, we know he's not going to die. Like, maybe you think she saw that? That would have been crazy. I think she sees some of it because at the end, she kind of gives him, like, yeah, peace never lasts, or like even kingdoms go away eventually, and kind of like gives this like cold wink to the audience as if like, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't know if she sees it yet. She reveals later that she knows that he is like destined to be this great hero who will bring peace to the people.
I had one super simple fix and I would have been happy the rest of the movie if Memnon called himself Scorpion King. You know, he plays with them at one point, but like, because then at the end when the Rock, and the spoilers we'll get, you know, but like when the Rock becomes the king at the end by killing him, then it makes sense that he's Scorpion King now. Like it's by kind of like the default. It's like when you kill Santa, you become him when you put the coat on.
Yeah, he doesn't call himself Scorpion King, but his palace does utilize scorpion iconography. There's a big gold scorpion on that palace.
Yeah.
He is on some level embracing this sort of scorpion thing, but it's not played up as much as you would think it would be in a movie called The Scorpion King.
That would have been a cool story-wise moment. Be like, oh, it's called the Scorpion King, but like, it's not The Rock that's a Scorpion King. Like, oh, how's this? Like, how does the name get to him?
Now, faced with the inability to kill Matthias himself or have him killed, Memnon has to come up with a creative solution to this problem. And what he decides to do is bury Matthias up to his neck in the desert, right outside some fire ant hills, along with the horse thief.
And I think this sequence is pretty successful. Way more successful than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Oh, yeah.
Fire ant sequence. This was fun. This was cool. He's got the horse thief is like gonna escape and blows the fire and he does the fireball out of his mouth.
Yeah, I don't entirely understand how Arpid escapes from his hole in the dirt. They don't really ever explain that.
There's a lot of that because Arpid will like sort of go down, like dig down somehow, and then just appear on the cliff. And then he takes out the guard by pushing him into the fire ants. And then the Rock's like, help me. And he's like, all right, I'll help you. And then we just cut to them walking along the entire. How did he get out? How long did that take? Doesn't matter. We're just gonna move on. And I was like, we're just gonna keep going.
I really enjoy that sequence. The comedic interplay between The Rock and Grant Heslov is really fun. I love The Rock killing ants with his face.
He like eats one and spits it out.
Yeah, he smushes one with his chin.
Good effects.
Yeah, I thought they did a solid job with the fire ants. So he makes a vow to not kill Arpid and share any wealth and treasure, right? I think that's sort of the bargain. And so because Akkadians, when they make an oath, they have to keep it. And so Arpid helps him. And then they end up heading into Gomorrah.
Yeah, this was wild. That this is like the Gomorrah of like Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yes.
PG-13 and everything. I don't know. There's just a lot of connotation about, it just makes the mind go to places to be like, what are we going to see here? Like, what are they going to push? I don't know. This is supposed to be like the good city, right? I guess compared to Sodom. I don't know how.
No, they were both wicked cities.
Okay, it's just weird that we would use this name and just make up a name.
Well, I think they wanted to place it in history somewhere, and Gomorrah is like famously this like wicked city where all sorts of bad things happen, and so I guess it makes sense to have your King Memnon hole up there.
I guess so, but we know he wasn't there, like in real life, maybe, right? So, like, it's just a little strange. It makes more sense in The Mummy for some reason than it does in this. I can't put my finger on it.
It doesn't really bother me all that much, but I can understand your point. We do get a little scene with Memnon and his sorceress. We learn a couple things. It's not a huge scene, but we understand that Memnon's point of view is that, like all great tyrants and dictators, he believes he is bringing order to chaos and that what he's doing is good for the region.
Yep.
She disagrees in so many words. We also learn about the fine print in the sorcerer-king relationship that if he were to basically have sex with her, she will lose her power of foresight.
Well, okay, so I was a little confused about this because I feel like at the end, if I can just jump there real quick, she explains that was like bullshit in the first place because it's just a way to stop your captor from sleeping with you.
Correct.
Right? She's like, it's just what we would tell them so that we didn't get, sexually abused all the time. Right. Just said, like, if you did that, we lose our power. But I thought it was like, if she did that, she wouldn't be able to tell his future because later she'll sleep with The Rock and it feels like she can't tell what's going to happen with him, but she can still tell what's going on otherwise. I was a little confused by that, if she just couldn't tell the future entirely or she couldn't tell that person's future. But in the end, it turns out that like that was just a lie. She could still tell the future no matter what.
I think that her ability, independent of any of that, is not 100% accurate. She can't always tell you with 100% certainty what's going to happen. And I think in that moment with The Rock, she sees a possible future.
Okay.
So I think that's what's happening there. And so I don't know that it's necessarily related to this whole sex clause. I love that it ends up kind of being bullshit by the end. But by this point in the movie, we believe it to be totally true. So now Matthias Matthias and the horse thief have arrived in Gomorrah. There's a really fun sequence where like some street urchins, these kids, steal a whole bunch of jewels from Matthias, and there's a whole chase sequence. It's very cute. They find the kid like hiding in a basket. It's very Indiana Jones.
Man, they hit all the notes of these kinds of adventure films or action films of the time where it's like, okay, he's got like the weakling sidekick.
Yep.
Right. So like it makes him more of a buff boy. He's got the little kid. All right. So it's like, all right, he's endearing, like he's a protector.
Right.
He's gonna get like the super attractive lady, and he's like a straight guy. So like for him, that's like the pinnacle. And pretty soon we're also gonna double down on the magic. We're gonna get like a wizard too.
Yep.
Which is so confusing because he's not like a wizard. He's more like an alchemist.
Yes.
And all he can really do is make gunpowder. He's got his family or something that he's kind of cobbled together here. His Final Fantasy party.
We'll take this a little bit at a time, I think. So when he finally finds this kid, he decides to, put him to use, and he goes, "How would you like to earn this? One of these jewels." And so the kid gets him into the palace. There's a really fun exchange where they're like sneaking down this hallway. They hear some guards, and Matthias looks at the kid and goes, "All right, you kill half, I'll kill half." And the kid just looks at him like, "Dude, I'm a child." Matthias goes, "All right, I'll kill them all."
Matthias was killing adults when he was that age.
And then we meet Philos. They sort of take refuge.
Sort of like a shortcut or something. They like go through the palace wall and like burst in on him.
Well, they're trying to escape from those guards.
Oh, that's it. Yeah.
They run into his lab, which is like an ancient Frankenstein lab of sorts. It's got all these different gadgets.
Yeah.
So we meet Philos, and then the scene in the courtyard happens.
Oh, right. Yeah. He's like, "Where's this dude?" And he's like, "In the courtyard." And we cut to the courtyard like tournament almost.
Yes.
And this was the point in the movie where I was getting kind of like, I was like, man, I almost wish this took place in like a Mad Max future, because I was getting like weird Fist of the North Star vibes from this particular sequence for some reason. I keep following this thing, even though I don't quite understand like where it's going to go or what's happening or anything, but it keeps me entertained.
I mean, it's not technically an action sequence, but, Memnon is training with his swords, and like he's really kicking ass, right? Like we really get to see him full force out in that training yard. And then we get to see he has the ability to like catch an arrow in the middle, like in midair.
Oh, that's right. He does like the whole Ozymandias thing.
So he's like fucking awesome, right? As a fighter. The child that was with Matthias is caught. At this point, they've separated, right? He gets his payment for getting him into the palace. But then Matthias is like ready to like launch an arrow into Memnon when this kid gets pulled out, and they're going to cut his arm off because that's how you deal with thieves in ancient Gomorrah. So there's a whole situation where Matthias has to now save this child instead of killing Memnon. He is being pursued by guards. This is where he gets back into Philos's lab, launches himself with the catapult, which is awesome. He ends up landing into what just happens to be Memnon's harem.
He gets up, he gives the eyebrow.
The eyebrow, yes. It's the only time he does anything like specifically like The Rock. They let him do the eyebrow, which is pretty awesome. And then, of course, the prostitutes in the harem strip him of all his gear as the guards burst through the door.
That was fun. Like he has to fight with no weapons for a minute and try and get more weapons.
Yeah, I actually really liked him not always having a sword on him. They mixed up the actions, so he's doing some sword fighting and then he's doing some hand-to-hand combat. And then maybe my favorite bit of the scene, he straight up steals the gong gag from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. He pulls the gong down and like rolls it across the room.
Runs alongside of it. Yep.
That's awesome. And then he leaps out of the building, crashes through into the sorceress's bathhouse.
Crashes in on her having a bath, right?
This is where I was like, how do we not see more of Kelly Hu? This is like the most strategic nudity I've ever seen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
With so much movement. I don't know how they accomplished it, but hats off to him.
Yeah, because he's going to like pick her up and throw her around, and she's going to be running around, and she's completely naked and soaking wet, and she just has like her very long hair as clothing, kind of like covering up just, her private parts. It is kind of crazy to watch and be like, "Whoa, I can't believe they got away with this."
Yeah, it's insane, but also impressive. They escape through the plumbing.
Oh my God, which I just can't imagine the smell of that going through ancient Gomorran plumbing. capture me instead.
It's not human waste, it's just bathwater.
In the movie, we only see bathwater, but like in reality and everything, they had to tone that down. They're not going to show like pieces of waste floating by her or anything like that. But like, I guess I shouldn't have, but I was using my imagination. I was like, that's way worse than they're allowed to depict.
They ultimately do escape. Matthias takes the sorceress hostage, and the trio are reunited as they head out into what is known as the Valley of the Dead, which the horse thief Arpide is very concerned because they call it the Valley of the Dead for a reason, but also he doesn't want to be left behind.
But The Rock's not concerned because he's like, that's where I'm from, right? Didn't he say something like his home is there? That makes sense. He's from the Valley of the Dead.
We check in with Memnon again. His armies are starting to lose a little bit of faith because the sorceress has vanished and, they don't really believe they can win without her. This is where he starts tipping arrows with scorpion venom, right? So now the scorpions are really coming into play. He sends his men out to find them and then use the arrows to kill Matthias. So the sorceress does try to escape, not successful, but the scene is important because this is where we learn that she's been a captive since childhood and that the reason that she lied back at the beginning of the movie is that, she believed that Matthias would eventually rescue her. So that's where we learn that. Now we get to Thorak and his men have caught up, and Matthias uses that really cool, sort of telescope with the crystal. I've never seen anything like that before, so I thought that was really neat.
Yeah, because that's just completely made up for the movie. Like we need more of that kind of stuff for the movie, Like I was almost hoping that the sorceress would cast some kind of spell of protection or anything, or like they would upgrade their weapons. At this point in the movie, when they're like really questing and they're together and they're like on the run and or whatever they're doing, I was just hoping like we're gonna get a pretty fun fight sequence with the sandstorm. Like in that cave, it would have been cool if he kind of came across like a treasure chest with something valuable in it that would help them win the day.
Oh, I think it would have been cool if while he was in Philos's workshop, take a couple things. Like Philos could have been the Q of this movie, just supplying interesting gadgets and things.
It's not going to kill it for me or anything, but I was just like, when he pops out that spyglass and moves the crystal around and stuff, I was like, that's fun. That's sort of the fun stuff that I thought we'd see a little more of just like movie magic kind of stuff.
Right. So now Matthias prepares to attack these men. He sees the approaching sandstorm behind them that they are not aware of. He slips on this really cool, protective eyewear, this primitive eye protection.
Oh yeah, his helmet.
And rides out, just him and his camel, just riding out against 10 guys on horseback.
But it's not just him and his camel, because it's him, his camel, and his sandstorm. This sandstorm moves so fast. It's like the sun coming up in The Mummy Returns. Like it's just a little too fast. It's not the greatest, but I like the concept behind it. The idea that he knows the desert so well, even the elements are on his side.
Yeah. There's a fight scene in the sandstorm that moves into a nearby cave. Matthias heads in there first. And for a couple minutes, the movie kind of becomes a horror movie in a sense.
Yeah, right? That's why I felt like I said earlier, this feels like the reshoots or the extra shooting thing. They went and they put this whole sequence together in the cave and they're like, yeah, let's make it more sneaky and horror. We got the quicksand. Right?
Yep.
That's really fun. And then he's taking them out one by one.
It's kind of like a role reversal where, the bad guys are getting picked off, right?
Yeah.
And Matthias is in the shadows like a xenomorph.
Really is.
Yeah, it's a really cool sequence. He manages to pick them off one at a time, but of course he doesn't come out of it unscathed. Thorak does manage to pierce him with that tipped arrow, which will kill him, but the sorceress uses her magic to save him. Basically, we talked about the Green Mile and Michael Clark Duncan earlier. She kind of does that same thing where she sucks out the bad stuff and saves his life, but as a result kind of gets a little bit sick herself. I mean, she lives, she's okay, but
Yeah, that's cool though that we get to see she has other magic abilities. She doesn't just tell the future. She can do this healing spell and who knows what else. I wish she had kind of shot lightning at the end of the movie or did something, But I mean, she could talk to animals. She talks to that camel at one point and gives him instructions.
Yeah, in hindsight, as for a sorceress, I kind of wish she had more powers. She's got a very limited skill set.
We just don't know what else she can do. I'm sure she can do tons of stuff, but we only get to see her do one or two things.
Right, and I'm sure it comes down to the $60 million budget.
There could be a scene, there would have been a fun scene when they're maybe the next night when they're around a campfire and Arpid's like, so like, I'm not just a horse thief. Like I could do this. I'm a plumber. Like I can, fix that. I'm a musician. And she can be like, well, I have other powers too. And she can just like list off a whole list of powers, like I can turn day to night. I can, teleport, like all this stuff, but it's really exhausting and only when I need to.
Right. She does say something important in this scene. She says that the blood of the scorpion will always flow through his veins, setting up a little bit of foreshadowing there.
Yeah, but why? This is the only time she's mentioned that. If he was from the Scorpion tribe, which Memnon sort of co-opted, right? Like imagine that. And that's why they're like extinct and shit, is because he kind of decimated the old version and is like, rebranding it as his. It's like, yeah, I'm taking the Scorpion logo and you guys are all dead now, And so like, I wish it was more streamlined or something. Like like as sort of simple as it is, I've got too many questions.
I think you're asking for more of this movie than it's capable of giving you.
But it wants me to believe that The Rock has scorpion blood running through his veins.
He does now because of the scorpion venom on the arrow tip.
Is that's what she's talking about?
Yeah.
Then that's my bad.
She pulled the venom out, the lethal element, but he will always have scorpion blood running through his veins.
Because like, how cool if like he got shot with the arrow and she was like, oh, like I healed you, but I noticed you would have like healed yourself because you've already got the scorpion blood in you passed down from like your legacy.
Sort of like how Rick O'Connell was like a surprise Magi revealed later at a convenient time.
Kind of, but not like secret. Like it's stuff The Rock knew, but never really felt like he was the one. But Kelly Hugh comes along and is like, oh, this is what I thought, right? But the movie is like, oh, you got shot with scorpion venom. Now you have scorpion venom or blood in your system. That's all it was saying. I thought it was trying to be a little more sort of like opening up the lore of what was to come. I thought it was trying to like hint at a backstory, but it was literally saying like, you now have scorpion blood in you because you got shot with the scorpion blood tipped arrow.
You might have been giving it more credit than it deserved.
Well, I'm at that point in the movie where I'm like, I'm having fun and I want to know more. So I'm like expanding it in my brain.
Okay, so she also reveals that Matthias, she believes he's going to be the one who will save all these people, not just save her, but, he is destined to go on and be this great ruler that will bring peace.
I wondered, is that how far she can see? Or like, does she know and want to be like, you know what? It's better to have that time of peace for what it's worth, even if it's going to get like really bad after that, to the point where he's going to become a monster. Should she have just kind of like taken him out in his sleep one night? Like, would that have just like solved a lot? I mean, maybe you got to wait until he takes out Memnon at least, but that's why I want to see what's up with these sequels. I got to see how he becomes so evil again.
So now at this point, Matthias takes a piece of thorax, some pendant he's wearing around his neck, and sends it back by Falcon to Memnon as a message that he killed Thorak and his men. Memnon saves face, lies, says everything's fine, but that he also plans to begin the attack against the remaining rebels in the area. He's just going to like go hard now, right? He's got to fight to win, and whether he's got this sorceress or not.
Shock and awe is his plan.
Yes. On their way back to Gamora, Matthias and everybody, they all encounter Phylos out in the desert experimenting with his fireworks.
He's just out there in the middle of the nowhere. It felt like he was prisoner of some kind, right? Like I felt like he was under surveillance, but like, no, he's just like wandering the desert, doing experiments, blowing shit up.
Well, I think on some level he is a subject of King Memnon, but like he has some autonomy, it seems like. He's not number one in Memnon's mind right now, so he can get away with taking an afternoon out in the desert without supervision.
I just gotta say, like, if my sorceress went missing, I'd be calling on my wizard, like, a lot. I'd be like, where is that guy?
Right? Like because he can create weapons, he can create all these other tools that could potentially help.
And who knows if he can't tell some kind of future too, or at least like bullshit his way through it.
So around this time, they are all taken captive by Balthazar.
Yeah, he's finally back. He's been gone for like an hour.
And he knows what the original task at hand was. It was, we had to kill that sorceress. To quote the dude here, some new shit has come to light. And Matthias knows, like, she's not the one they need to kill. Balthazar, like, he's not up to date on all the new shit.
He kind of gives like a little like unite them all kind of speech, right? And then basically everyone just wants to fight. That's what I feel about this movie. You know, everyone's just like waiting around like, just tell me who I should be fighting and I'm good. That's who a leader should be. And they like look at The Rock and he's like, we're all gonna band together and fight Memnon because he's an asshole.
He first says anybody who touches this woman's going to have to go through me. Before they unite all of these remaining tribes, there's a really actually pretty sick fight scene between Matthias and Balthazar.
Oh yeah, and he spares him.
Yeah, I love that it starts with their swords breaking. Like, these guys are so strong that the first swing of the sword, both swords break. And so now it's just a slugfest through the camp.
And I gotta be honest, like I know this is The Rock's movie, okay?
Yeah.
But Michael Clark Duncan could definitely be this, could have been the Scorpion King. Like that's what I
Sure.
watch these guys. It's like they're even, you know. I'm like, it could have been. It's like a coin toss to me. Yeah, there's a lot of muscle. These guys are huge. I was expecting The Rock to give him the rock bottom or something, but we don't get that far really.
No, but it is a really fun fight sequence. And yeah, I really enjoy that. So once Matthias has defeated Balthazar in hand-to-hand combat, he does manage to convince everyone, you know, not to kill the sorceress, who the real enemy is, and that they can band together and defeat him as one. That evening, that's when the sorceress has that vision that Memnon will track them back to that encampment and kill everyone.
Yeah, so she has a very short-sighted kind of foretelling power. So I'm convinced she can't tell years and years into the future. She can just kind of tell like maybe days, which has to be frustrating when you're Memnon and you're like getting ready for battle and you know you're not sure like until like the day before if you're going to go through with it or not because she can't tell if you're going to win yet.
Imagine being like in Memnon's army. Like, you have to be ready at all times.
Yeah, and you got to be like crossing your fingers, be like, I hope she sees defeat and we could all go home today.
But yeah, we know that this is not necessarily what will happen. It is sort of a possible future for them. But Matthias is very much a guy who believes he will make his own destiny. In fact, he says that earlier, like a few scenes prior.
Like his catchphrase.
This is when they have sex. I guess he's not concerned with her ability to tell the future.
He doesn't know about that rule, though. Only Memnon mentions that. Like, I don't think he's aware that that's a loophole or whatever, you got a clause in this.
Okay, so that's something that I'm a little bit confused about. I wasn't able to track that when I was taking my notes. At some point, I think he learns about that because he questions it at the end, but I'm not entirely sure. I thought it was in this scene.
I thought that was the writers getting confused at the very end and trying to end on like some kind of joke. I was like, how does he know that? I was like, why does he mention that?
Yeah, it's entirely possible it never comes up in a scene he is in, and then we as the audience are the only ones who know that. So,
I mean, that's fine. That's why it's a movie, you know? Like, a movie's allowed to do that kind of weird stuff and like break reality and stuff.
So that evening, as Matthias is sleeping, the sorceress decides she's going to take his camel and ride back to Gomorrah alone. And following morning, he wakes up by himself. Balthazar and the remaining tribes have all banded together.
So you think she went back to be like a distraction or like an inside man kind of situation where it's like, I'll go in there, I'll pass the snake test, I'll convince him that I still got my powers and stuff. And then when The Rock shows up, he's got me on the inside. So like I could do whatever. Because I was kind of confused. It's like, why are you going alone? Because it felt like she was saying, I'm going back so that this prophecy doesn't happen. And I'm going to be subservient to Memnon now.
Yes, I think that she knew that if she stayed, Memnon would eventually track her down and kill everybody. So in order to avoid that future, she decided to leave.
It makes more sense talking about it now. Like, okay, Memnon would have tracked her to their camp, slaughtered everybody. Instead, she goes back and then they go to him, you know, they like, because he doesn't know where they are and he just kind of wants the sorceress. So like he's not even aware that these guys have all banded together. So they could kind of do their surprise attack while he's like reorganizing, I guess, now that he has sorceress back.
Right. Yeah. I think this is more about protecting, because she sees like a child die in her vision. I think she's more concerned about stopping that from happening than saving herself. But, she's got the gift of foresight. So how much does she actually know about the future here? I don't know. I think in the moment she's only concerned about saving those people. So
Right.
she goes back. We get another scene. Like Memnon's men, they're not going to fight. They haven't seen this sorceress in like days. No one has seen her alive. They assume she's dead. And that if they go into battle the next day, they're surely going to die. Right on cue, she shows up, says that she sees that they will have a great victory.
She doesn't say they will have a great victory. She says, I see a great victory. Like she chooses those words super carefully.
Fair enough. She foresees a great victory and also mentions that their enemies will be revealed to them.
Which, duh, like that is the most like Miss Cleo line in the entire in her entire spiel, like her gimmick of this psychic stuff. Like, of course your enemies are going to be revealed to, like but he already knows who his enemies are. He's he hates that rock guy. He hates Balthazar.
So now comes like the infiltration of Gamora, and there's some really fun stuff here. Now I'm going to try and keep the rest of this movie straight. It does sort of become a hodgepodge of like all these different plot threads happening at once.
It's kind of like the end of the Mummy movies, right? Where there's like 2 or 3 different kind of storylines going on and converging. You have different teams and groups of people like performing different like sequences, and then they're intercutting between them all.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit just to finish out that scene before we move on. So that soldier who's concerned about losing and all of Memnon just kills that guy, I guess, to make an example, and tells the rest of his men to be ready to fight in the next day. Meanwhile, Balthazar and Isis and everyone are sneaking in. And I love that his tactic is to dress in drag in this like cart full of prostitutes to get into the city.
Yeah, I never suspect.
Like he comes in through the cart like a Trojan horse. I think Matthias comes up over the wall. They all kind of have their own ways of getting in.
I just remember, I wrote down, because I remember at this point, like they really start leaning heavy on The Rock's facial expressions. I guess maybe because the character is becoming less of a loner and kind of maybe opening up more. But like, I feel like there's a lot of just shots of The Rock. He won't say anything and he'll just sort of like look, and he'll give like that, whatever, the smolder. Right? Didn't some people used to joke that The Rock is smoldering, like when he looks at you or something?
Oh, yeah.
Like that's kind of how it starts feeling here at the end. Like no use for words, just looks.
Some of his charm comes out here. Like I love that one-liner when Balthazar gets out of the cart and he's like in full drag, and Matthias goes, "No need for concern, miss." Nice joke there. So meanwhile, while that's all happening, Phylos and Arpide, they're a team. Their task is to sort of set explosives throughout the palace. All this stuff's happening at once. They seal the gates from the inside. So once the fighting starts, they'll sort of trap everybody inside the city walls.
Yeah, to quote another podcast, they lock the gates.
They lock the gates. Now we get to the scene where Memnon tests his sorceress. He tests her loyalty and her ability to see into the future with the snake test.
We get some more of CGI, which is used very sparingly, I feel, in this movie, like actual, like getting a CGI model of something like a snake like this. And I think it's kind of fun, I mean, I don't think they're going for 100% realism with the Cobra thing, but like it looks cool as hell.
Yeah, I buy it.
I like the way it looks because it's kind of hyper realistic almost, which I think makes it work because of the type of movie we're in. It's like this snake definitely is thinking and has like it feels more like cartoon logic, but like realistic looking, like the snake could understand you if you talk to it or something.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Not Uncanny Valley sort of stuff.
No, not sort of Uncanny Valley thing, but just that they gave it like personality somehow. I don't know.
It's a cool scene. His test for her is he's got 6 urns on a lazy Susan, and he has his men drop 4 cobras into them. So there are going to be 2 empty urns. He covers them, spins the table, and then she has to find the 2 urns that have no snakes in them.
And he definitely does not believe that she will be able to do it.
Well, she sort of does it. I mean, she is successful in what she is trying to do, is how I will phrase it. She finds 1 empty jar, and then with her second attempt, she does find a snake, but she knows there's the snake, and then kind of uses that as a weapon against Memnon.
It's kind of charmed, like, in a way.
Yes.
Yeah, and she, like, has it, and it's, like, wrapped around her arm, and it doesn't seem like That's what I kind of meant. Like, I felt like she can talk to animals in this movie, because before, when she ran away, the scene ends when she's leaving the Rock's camp or Balthazar's camp or Queen Isis's camp, and she's like going up to the camel and she's like, okay, camel, now I'm going to tell you a bunch of stuff and just listen. And then it like, the scene kind of cuts and
Yes.
it goes away, And so like, I feel like she kind of whispered to this snake in her mind that like, chill out. I'm not going to hurt you. Like, let's scare the hell out of this guy.
Yeah, if she were a Dungeons and Dragons character, she would be adept at animal handling, that's for sure.
Hell yeah.
So that's that scene. While that's all happening, Matthias is scaling the city walls. I mentioned Phylos and Arpede are preparing the explosives, and then Balthazar and the rest of the rebels are basically just fighting guards. They're not doing anything more complicated than that. The movie sort of erupts into a proper fight montage. Matthias bursts in, he begins fighting with Memnon, and then over the course of that sequence, so I'm going to sort of jump around and breeze through some pieces here. Memnon starts this fight with one sword, and then he gets two swords, and he ends it with two flaming swords. So it like just keeps escalating and escalating and escalating until the very end of the movie, which is really cool. To see just sword fighting, have stages like that is really neat.
Yeah, I gotta just say, like, I was watching the sword fight and stuff, and I was going like, oh, like I wish someone picked up like a scorpion blade or like had some kind of weird shield, and then the swords catch on fire. And I'm like, okay, I'm good. This is all I needed. I'm happy now.
While that's happening, Balthazar finds Takmet, and we get some comeuppance there. He kills Takmet for betraying them and for killing his own father. So that's cool.
Yeah, that little guy was a weasel the whole movie. I was waiting for him to eat it. Oh, man.
Yeah, I'm going to say this now. I feel like Takmet was kind of a wasted character.
Oh, definitely. He should have been conspiring to like take over after, you know what I'm saying? Like once all the dust has settled, I feel like he's the kind of guy who would like sneak in after and try and make his move.
Yeah, he's in the movie to betray Matthias at the beginning, and then at the end he gets his comeuppance. But like that's kind of it. I feel like he could have been like the second-hand man.
Well, they tried to play him off a little like that, but he's not necessary. They don't need him. Like he doesn't offer anything else. Like he's not a strategic dude. He's not a great warrior. He's a guy who murdered his dad, right? Like that was his role. And it just kind of feels like he's sitting around like eating and drinking the rest of the movie.
I feel like they should have made a decision one way or the other. Either don't include him in this movie at all or do more with him. And they kind of fail at both. He ends up dying, which is fine. As we're getting close to the climax of this sword fight between Memnon and Matthias, the sorceress sort of inadvertently causes Matthias to be shot with an arrow. She sees the archer coming and like sort of runs out in front of him, but he still ends up getting shot with the arrow anyway.
Yeah, and it wasn't even anybody in particular. It was just like some random guard shoots him in the back with an arrow. And I was wondering if it was scorpion tipped, and if the reason it didn't really hurt the Rock this time is because he's already got it flowing through his blood.
Right. I mean, what if it works like a vaccination and, like now he's got a natural immunity to the scorpion venom? It's not elaborated upon, so we can only guess.
Like a lot of this, nothing is really elaborated on. You just got to like whatever they say, that's all.
That's it. She ends up managing to like kill that archer. Matthias digs that arrow out of his back, grabs the bow, and shoots it straight at Memnon. Now, we've seen him catch the arrow in the past, right? They sort of set this scene up. And doesn't Matthias say something like, catch this?
Oh, I can't remember what he says, but he's definitely got some kind of line. And I was just, like the arrogance of Memnon to be like, he's just going to stand there and give him this shot because he's like, oh, I caught an arrow that one of my weakling guards who's like easy 150 pounds less than this dude and can't kick as much ass. And I saw The Rock shoot a guy with a bow and arrow in the opening scene of this movie, and he went flying out of a window like over the trees into the forest, never to be seen again. I have a feeling he's going to shoot it a little faster and a little harder than one of Memnon's lackeys. Just the balls on this guy to be like, it's because it's not like Ozymandias where like no one can sort of make a bullet go faster than anyone else, right? You shoot a gun, like you catch a bullet, that's one thing, but like this is an arrow shot by two completely different people in the movie. There's no way to assume that like you're going to be able to catch this one. Like it's just so funny to me how he's like, take your shot.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And the way it's cut together, together. This moment happens just as it appears that the rebels are going to lose this fight. By this point in the battle, they're kind of getting their asses handed to them by Memnon's men. And Arpide and Phylos, the army has sort of intervened and sort of stopped them from setting off the explosives. But Arpide makes his last ditch effort to get that fuse lit.
Yeah, good for him.
So now the explosions are going off. Matthias's arrow pierces Memnon, knocking him straight off the top of that wall. Essentially, the rebels take the city, and Memnon's own men now recognize him as the new king, because the way that they operate is that the fiercest warrior among them is their king, their de facto king.
Like it or not kind of situation too. And we should say, there's a great shot of a flaming Memnon corpse flying through the night sky at one point. It was just so crazy.
Love it. All that's left is really the final sequence, the sort of epilogue. Balthazar leaves on good terms with Matthias, telling him Nubian's eyes will be watching you, Scorpion King. So now he has a name.
So why did he call him that? Why did Balthazar just decide to be I don the Scorpion King from now on? Why? I mean, it's fine, but it's just so because we have to.
Yes. Yeah. 100%.
Which that's why I fucking love movies. That is so great. Logic does not need to make any sense.
No, yeah. At some point in the writer's room, they were like, okay, well, at some point we have to call him Scorpion King. So that's where they put it, right in that final scene. Like you said, I agree with you. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I don't know why Balthazar, of all people, would call him Scorpion King, but
that's why Memnon, that's we didn't have to do all that stuff with the blood that I was talking about before that I kind of misinterpreted when he got shot with the arrow. But if Memnon had just gone by Scorpion King, it would have been so simple. And that's such a cool name to sort of invoke fear or power or whatever, over his army. And it's such a cool symbol that it's like a hand-me-down name, he's the new Dread Pirate Roberts now, and now this Scorpion King is going to be a cool one for a while. So until he turns into a horrible scorpion monster, but that's for another day. Oh, dude, can I roll back real quick to when the castle starts exploding? So this has to be the first time these people have seen explosions, right?
Possibly, yeah.
This is the first time gunpowder's used in the history of this movie, in the timeline of this movie. So explosions are happening. Soldiers must just be dying from not being able to process what's happening and being scared to death or having heart attacks or losing their mind to be what do I even call this? It's just raining fire from the skies and stuff.
At one point when we first see it, Phylos refers to it as his Chinese powder. So, presumably they're hearing about this explosive powder off in the east.
How funny it must have been for the soldiers who were we're hard as hell. We've been through everything. We've seen it all. And then all of a sudden this new stuff called gunpowder and things are starting to blow up. And it's what? How do you comprehend that when you're fighting in a battle for the first time? It just, I don't know. It's a silly thing that I thought of.
No, totally. Then we have a scene with the sorceress. She tells him she sees a future of great peace. We, learn that the whole sorceress sex thing was a lie created by her ancestors to keep kings from taking advantage. Then finally Matthias asks, how long will this era of peace last? And she simply responds, nothing lasts forever. And that is where we end the Scorpion King. We as the viewer, we know, he's ultimately going to become this conqueror type, this sort of evil character who will make a deal with Anubis and turn into a big giant scorpion monster, and maybe she sees that. I can't tell. So that's what awaits him. I'm hoping, I'm not sure how far this franchise will get to that part of his life. I haven't seen any of these. If you're listening, we're going to be experiencing these all for the first time. I don't know that this is going to necessarily get to the point where he's making deals with Anubis and becomes an evil character. I feel like that would be a cool storytelling decision to watch your hero become a villain by the end of it. But I don't know. I get the sense that because they're all straight to DVD, they're going to keep Matthias like a hero.
You don't think we're ever going to get there?
I don't know. I don't have high hopes.
The most I'm hoping for, which maybe this is too high, maybe I do have high hopes, is that the last scene of the last movie is the first scene of The Mummy Returns.
I would love that, so I'll keep my fingers crossed. But I think this is really going to just be kind of a knockoff Conan the Barbarian adventure series. So every movie will be like its own kind of standalone adventure. But, I could be surprised. I hope so.
And I'll be honest with you, Dan, if that's what it turns out to be, I think I'm cool with that. I did not think I would be, to be perfectly honest with you. Like, I did not expect to have as much fun with this. I mean, maybe because I like Conan stuff so much that it has enough of that vibe. It's almost like, again, like, even though they get away with so much, Conan gets away with a lot too, and that is R-rated. This feels like Conan Light.
Yeah.
Or like something like, I just know, like, if I had been a teenager instead of in my 20s when this came out, like, I'd have been all over this movie. I'd have loved this movie. As it is now, I really like it. Like, I think it's a lot of fun. And, and I think the most important thing is it knows what it is. A lot of movies have these identity crises, and like, for what's going on, like, the movie knows what it's doing. It might not always be so straight and clear, or it might be too clear that you want a more elaborate explanation for what's happening, and it's hard to just take things at face value, but it's not. It just wants to be simple and have fun. And so, like, that's what's so much fun about it, is like, it's got a good spirit, it's got a very fun vibe, it's got like those crazy movie moments where it's just like happening because. And that's why I think I really liked it, and I'm can't believe I'm saying, like, I'm looking forward to seeing where the Scorpion King series goes.
Yeah, likewise. You sort of talked about how the Conan movies, are rated, and I think like the Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan movies are more like the original, like Robert E. Howard Conan, the original pulp stories, and then you've got your like Marvel Comics Conan the Barbarian, which is more kid oriented. And I think this movie is more like that, more like the Marvel Conan. And, I think that's fine. I think you can have your adult Conan, you can have your kids Conan. It's all silly, sword and sandal bullshit, but that's okay. Like you, I was also really surprised at how much I legitimately enjoyed this one. Now, it's no classic, I didn't give it like 5 stars on Letterboxd or anything like that, but it's definitely one of those movies that, like, if I want to scratch that itch, that sort of magical sword and sorcery kind of thing, this is a perfectly good example of that. And I think that it's a little bit underrated in that respect. I don't think people talk about it as much as they should. And I'm frankly looking forward to whatever happens with this Conan, or with this Scorpion King reboot that we're going to be getting hopefully in the next couple years.
As we've been talking about it, here's what I want to happen with the Scorpion King reboot. I want him to be transported from his time into our time and do sort of like a fish out of water thing with him. And I think that I'd enjoy. I think I'd be down for that.
Yeah, hell yeah. By Crom. That'll do it for this episode of The Return of the Monsters That Made Us. But we will be back Friday, February 23rd, as I mentioned before, for Stephen Sommers' 2004 blockbuster monster mashup Van Helsing, starring Hugh Jackman, Kate Beckinsale. Yeah, that's a fun cast for sure. You can follow us on X, aka Twitter, at MonsterMadePod. We're also on Blue Sky at MonsterMadePod, just in case Twitter doesn't work out. And we're also on Instagram and Facebook at The Monsters That Made Us. And you can follow me pretty much everywhere at Dan Colon. Mike, where can listeners find you?
You can find me online at The Mikester, that's MIKESTIR, and you can find all the other shows I'm on at cageclub.me.
I want to give a quick shout out to our latest Patreon supporter, Kevin Irvin. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you.
We appreciate the support. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to become a Patreon supporter like Kevin, you can do so at patreon.com/themonstersthatmadeus. I believe I've said before that every dollar that we get through the Patreon gets put right back into the show, and it helps us bring more of this stuff to you guys. Your support is very important to us, and we really can't thank you enough for that. You can also support the show by giving us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes, and our t-shirts are available on TeePublic. You can find the link for that in our aforementioned Twitter and Instagram bios. For all other things Cage Club related, just head on over to cageclub.me. That's cageclub.me. Stay spooky, everybody.